So this brings me to the second day of the event. Little feedback from tomorrow. So I really want you to keep noting and making your notes, and we'll have a small test or kind of presentation from everybody. So please have your material ready, and I'll discuss that a little later. You also keep track of all what is being discussed and the net outcome that you finally get out of that particular session. So therefore, this is very important for all of us, to be on time. I'm sure that everybody is in. So because it's very important to be on time. Now, for this session, actually, I am particularly, happy that Mr. Harish is with us, and many of you must be knowing the good work being done by Daksh. He is the founder of Daksh. And Daksh is one organization in the country who has been into hardcore empirical legal research. And they have brought out a range of studies dealing with numbers, predicting trends, litigation surveys, and I'm happy that they have collaborated with NLU Delhi also, and our team also worked with them. And as I said, there are very few organizations who have gone into exploring the judicial performance, litigation issues through the trends, through the numbers, by studying the frequency and the data. So they are dealing with the data. So I insisted, Mr. Harish, because he was keeping very busy, but I thought this workshop would remain incomplete if I failed to bring him in. Reason is very simple, because as I said, there are very few people in the country who have actually gone into the nitty-gritty of data, the legal data, and they have been able to derive certain very interesting results and inferences which are quite contrary to the widely held beliefs. Because as I said in the beginning, that many of us continue to be guided by the notions, the ideas which have no basis, and we continue to solidify our this misplaced notion, and we create a kind of impression and understanding which is not only flawed but also misleading. So that is very important. One of the important functioning of the data-driven understanding and evidence-based learning and evidence-based research is something which is quite in keeping with the international trends in this particular area. And therefore, I personally consider that his session is something which would provide you an opportunity in terms of understanding two very interesting and important things. One, you would be able to understand how a hardcore applied legal research can be conceived, created, and executed. Secondly, it would also help understand that you can challenge your own conventional notions with respect to all these ideas. So I have requested him to demonstrate some of the work that Daksh has done in the recent past. So besides displaying the findings of those studies, you would also have the opportunity to understand the data, the methodology which has been applied in the researches that the Daksh has carried out. So it would be a kind of demonstration, seeing research in action. Now that is something which I really wanted it to happen in this particular workshop. So therefore I would really like you to document very carefully what is being extended. I have requested him to remain with us in this whole move, and we have kept this session very open. So I leave it to, and once again I welcome you. I actually insisted him to come. He didn't have time. He was keeping very busy today. He had a arbitration to be done, but I said you have to come because we had only this day available. And I am very happy and thankful that he has acceded to our request. So he is with us. So now I leave it floor to you in whatever way you want to shape the session. They are all, mostly they are assistant professors, and a couple of them are research scholars also. But all of them are teaching in different law schools across the country. So they are all very keenly waiting to hear you. Mr. Harish.
Thank you, Professor Bajpai. So, to be honest, when Professor Bajpai called me and said, can you come and participate in this workshop, my initial, like last year also he had called me and said, can you participate? And I am, to be completely honest, I am generally skeptical going and talking to academics. Okay. With all due respect, I mean, I know you all teach budding lawyers. Because I always feel that there is a gap in understanding when I talk about what we are doing at Daksh and how academics react. And it is not any particular individual's fault. Because the way legal academia has developed, and the way we were taught law, I mean, I finished, I graduated in 1996. And the way we were taught law, there was no data. I mean, we were taught how to read judgments, how to analyze judgments, how to critique judgments, how to interpret statutes and rules, and we were taught some bit of philosophy, right, jurisprudence and all of that. And even in 1996, this was a big problem. I mean, nobody told us what happens in the legal system. Upendra Bakshi wrote Crisis of the Indian Legal System in 1982. It could well have been written yesterday, the issues that he raised. So, whenever we talk to academia about the work we are doing, we feel that there is a gap in understanding this, right? And we have actually over the last 2 years I've written to various law schools, and I've personally reached out to various vice chancellors, asking them to set up Center for Judicial Studies focusing on data. And if you look at the US, I think there are about 50, 60 law schools across the US that have Center for Judicial Studies, and some of these have been around for more than 60, 70 years. In India, there is none. Right? And I'm glad actually that today, of the 2 universities that have responded positively, I'm speaking in one. And there's one more person from NLU Orissa, Professor Krishnadeva Rao also has reacted positively. So, we have a participant from there. None of the others actually even responded. I mean, we wrote to about 8 or 10 universities. So I think that's why. So I'm always skeptical about going and talking to academia about what we're doing. But it's important because unless academia starts looking at data concerning the Indian legal system, particularly the judiciary, which is what we focus on, and starts using data to understand the system, we're just going to be analyzing, whether we are still influenced by the colonial system or whether we have aspects of, the ancient Indian legal system, and all of that, all important questions. But how relevant is it to the person who actually goes and uses the judicial system, right? What is the expectation of any person who approaches the judicial system, and how does the system deal with that person? Okay. But if you compare what happens with the bureaucracy, right? There have been many studies on how the bureaucracy functions, right? There's data, documented data. Some of it questionable, but it's still enough data. But in India, we don't have enough data. So, but Professor Bajpai, as you mentioned, that he called me and said, no, you have to come. So I said, and I asked him who are the participants, will they be open to listening to a practitioner talking about data, he said, no, you have to come, don't worry about it. We've got a good set of participants this time. And then I realized, okay, this is important. And I also have a selfish motive. I want people, particularly academia, to look at the data and use it and write about it. Right? So, in fact, all the, to make my point about legal academia, all the scholars that have contacted us until now, asking for using data, apart from a few honorable exceptions in India, are mostly from outside India. And that also set me thinking, why is it that legal academics outside India are more open to studying data, and legal academics in India are not open to studying data? And it's sort of a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We're not well trained, or we're not, forget about training, we're not even thinking about using data to question things. That's the background about why, so there are two reasons to come here. One, of course, NLU Delhi has worked with Daksh. Second, a very selfish motive. I want all of you to start looking at the data and writing about it, and question, some of the findings that we have come up with, so that the data can become more robust, right? Because it's only academic institutions that can sustain this kind of work, for many years. I mean, Daksh may stop this after 5 years. I mean, we may run out of steam. But I think academic institutions are there for much longer. So you need to sort of engender this kind of, study and research. So having said that, sort of longish introduction, I apologize for that. What I will do today is I won't talk about, what empirical legal research is. I'm sure all of you know that much better than I do. What I will explain is what we are doing, okay, and what went on in our mind when we decided to do a couple of studies, and what kind of methodology we used, and what was our end goal. And Professor Bajpai also talked about structuring of the report, so I talked about structuring of the report as well. So I don't have a very long presentation, but I will open up the various links that I have included, and we can go through some of the reports and methodologies I've used. Okay, so please feel free to stop me at any point of time if you have any question, and let's keep it interactive as much as possible. So we work only with data. So all our work, all of Daksh's work, is based on one thing: data. Right? We don't prepare academic articles or academic work based on theory ourselves. We may use theory to understand some of the data, and we may use data to question some of the theory. But all the work that we do, our rule is that there has to be data that backs any assertion or claim that we make, or argument that we make. Okay, that's the first rule that we have. So the question is why? And let me start why we started this. I mean, we call our project on the judiciary the Rule of Law project. And why did we start? It actually started in a conversation with a non-lawyer who asked me one day, earlier Daksh has been around for about 10 years. We were mainly doing scorecards for MLAs, MPs, and all of that for the first 6-7 years of our existence. And one of my friends, who's a non-lawyer, asked me, "Listen, why aren't you guys doing anything about the judiciary? I mean, all you lawyers are just busy making money. You're not interested in the judicial system. It's going to dogs. Why are you not doing anything about the judicial system?" And I said, I've always been interested, but to be honest, I don't know where to start. What do you do about the judicial system? Right? And that's a question that we asked ourselves. So what can we do about the judicial system? Because all attempts to reform the judicial system in some form or other in the last 20, 30 years, whether it be appointments, whether it be modifying the CPC, whether it be, how should the subordinate judiciary be organized, all of that, there have been various challenges because of various vested interests, including lawyers. So we said, what do we do? And my co-founder at Dutch, he's not a lawyer, and he's an IT guy. He says, okay, what is the problem with the judicial system? And I said, well, what is the problem? What do you read about in the newspaper? He said, is it true that it will take another 150 years to clear the backlog? I said, I don't know. So let's find out. Right? So that's the why. The first thing is, how many of you know anything beyond the fact that 3 crore cases are pending in the Indian courts? Right? What does the 3 crore cases mean? How long have they been pending for? If all the 3 crore cases have been pending only for a year, year and a half, there's no problem. Right? It's a fantastic system. So that was the first point we realized. Nobody actually knows what the 3 crore number means. So, and I would suggest that even number 3 crore is disputed, because you can look at something called the Supreme Court News Quarterly. They call it Court News, I think. They come out once in a quarter. They come out with consolidated data on how many cases are pending, and go and look at it. And there's one particular number. I think it's about 2.8 crores or 3.2 crores. Then you look at something called ecourts.gov.in. How many of you looked at ecourts.gov.in? Only 2 or 3 hands. Is that it? Okay. Go and look at ecourts.gov.in. Right? And that shows a different number. So actually, nobody knows how many cases are pending in the system today. And why is it important? I won't ask a question, I'll let you ponder it. We think it's important, that's why we embarked on this route. So we said we need to understand what this 3 crore number means. So why? And how do you understand? We needed data. So we always ask ourselves before we do any study, why do we need to do this study? And what is the problem? The second question is how? Right? How do we do this study? Any data collection, you have to be able to say that the data is good, that the data is strong. There will always be people who question data, right? But when I say questioning data, it means people may question how you collected the data, and may have questions and may have doubts about whether that was the right method to collect the data. But people may also question about how you interpret the data. Okay, so I'll come to that. But why is an important factor? Why do we need data is the first question that we ask ourselves everywhere. And for us, the answer was very clear, because there is no data available in the country about the judicial system. There may be data available with some registrars, there may be data available with some courts, but no single person has good data. Just to give you an example, the 245th Law Commission report, you should, if possible, try and read it. It was written, by committee. At that time, the chairman was A.P. Shah. But they looked into pursuant to a direction by the Supreme Court in a live case. I think Imtiaz Ahmad, if I'm correct. The Supreme Court asked the Law Commission to collect data about certain parameters. The Law Commission then writes, pursuant to a direction by the Supreme Court on the judicial side, not on the administrative side, writes to all the high courts, asking for data. And then the Law Commission ruefully notes in the introduction that many high courts do not respond. As law professors, you can ask questions about rule of law. If the high courts themselves don't follow what the Supreme Court is asking them to provide, what is the status of the rule of law in this country? But that's a separate point of discussion. Actually, I understand, I'm not sure about this, but please go and check. I believe the Supreme Court actually imposed costs of the registries of some high courts for not having complied with this. Right? So But so he notes A that the many high courts don't respond. So the question is, why didn't they respond? There is no scientific maintenance of data. That's the first point. And there was no mechanism in each of the high courts to collect the data in the manner the Law Commission wanted and send it to them. That's the second part. The third part, and then again it's interesting. In one high court, I won't name the high court, but go and look at the Law Commission report. They showed negative filing of cases in a year. How can there be negative filing? You know, even for all of us in this room who are not data scientists, you can have 0 cases filed. No case was filed, so it will be 0, the number in the column. You can't show it as -1 or -2 or -3.
Filing means you are applying to original jurisdiction or applied jurisdiction?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Okay, this was actually for the lower courts, it was original jurisdiction. So the one court responded that there was negative filing. So they showed minus whatever 10,000 or 20,000. You can again look at the exact number. I don't want to tell you the name of the high court. It's just to encourage you to go and look at the report. So how can that be? So when we started thinking about this 3 crore number and wanting to understand, and then we started looking at all of this and say, so what data do we rely on? How do we actually get data? Should we, write to the high courts? Hang on, they need to respond to the Law Commission. So why will they respond to me? Some lawyer sitting in Bangalore with an NGO, lots of lawyers and NGOs in the country. Right? So why will they respond to me? So then, when somebody asked me, look, how long do you think you will take to get data from one organization? Our initial assumption was that to get data from maybe 6 high courts, we will take maybe about 3 years. And we started this project at the end of about 2015, November or so, we started the Rule of Law project. So I said maybe in 3 years I'll get data from 6 high courts. And then very quickly we realized it's not sustainable, it's not possible to do this. So if we don't know whether data that is being put out in the public and maintained in the public is by the high courts is not correct, how do we collect data? So then we asked ourselves, and we're all practicing law, we said, what is the one piece of information that is put out by the courts that is actually seen by others and verified by others? Any guesses? Is there anybody here who's practiced as a lawyer before?
Costless.
Costless. Right? Absolutely. So there's actually only one piece of information that courts put out about cases, apart from final judgments, right? Final judgments come out. It's a cost list. Because if some case that was supposed to be listed today is not listed, the lawyers will go and create hell in the industry. Right? So we said, how do we, to build a database, to do a data-driven study of the total number of try and understand this 3 crore cases. That's where we started, right? We need to make sure that we have valid data. And the valid data can only be derived from the causes. That's what was concluded. And then we started building the database. I gave you that example, and I'll come to that in detail, is to show that how do we do empirical legal research and how do we collect data is very important. You have to question the source of the data. If you don't question, see, you're only as good as your data. Right? If you're depending on, or if you're claiming that you're going to do empirical legal research, then your research is only as good as your data. So that's important. Then the question is what? So I was explaining what are the 4 or 5 points that that drives our research. So why now? What is the question? So how do you go about it? It's the what is it that we are actually collecting? We should be very clear as to what we are collecting and what we are not collecting. We should not promise more than what we're actually collecting. So once we started, and I'll explain this a little bit later, once we started putting out some data in public, we got many number of requests. Oh, can you give us details of POXO cases in one district? Can you give us details of rape cases in other districts? And we said no, we can't, because we are not collecting them. And I'll explain to you why that is a problem. But this what is important. You can't use the same. You can't use. It's like you have a bottle of water, but only when you ask, okay, what is the nature of the bottle? Is it plastic or glass? Will you know the exact content? You can't say I have a bottle of water, and that doesn't become a solution for everything, right? When you start defining the data that you have, when you start putting fences around the data that you have, only then will you be able to ensure that your research is also strong. Okay? So don't assume that the data you're collecting is the same for everything. I'm sort of spending some time on this because I've seen many people use one piece of data and draw various conclusions. And I'll give you a classic example of how newspapers very often misinterpret the data that we have put out and sort of conveniently say what they want. Every 6 months now, either Hindustan Times or Times of India will say how many years it's going to take to decide to take good cases. Okay, every 6 months, just go and do some research, do a Google search. So if one person says 300 years, another person will say 175 years, and then it keeps happening. So, but what data are they using? That is the question. So what is the data is also something you should be very clear. So why, how, what are the three questions that I would urge all of you to ask before you start doing any empirical legal research. This is what we did. There could be other factors that go into it, and I'll give you some more concrete examples soon. But this is what we did. Yes?
Sir, you said the cause lists can be one of the sources from which we can collect data easily. But I think the Supreme Court has it, all the high courts have it, and many subordinate courts also have it. But it's not being followed, or it's not in practice in almost all the subordinate courts of this country. So then
there's a problem.
That's the problem.
I'll come to that. In the first concrete example that I'll take, I'll show you what the problems are. Then the last thing is for whom, and that is the second part of the topic that Dr. Bajpai mentioned, which is structuring the report. And structuring the report, I think for whom is very important. And it was particularly important for us, and may not be important for many of you because most of you are academic scholars, so you're probably writing a journal. So the audience is very clear. Right? For us, it was not clear who the audience was. Right? Who did we want to use our data? Was it the judges to see what the problem is? This is Venkatachalaya called our report as holding a mirror to the judiciary. Okay, because it was just showing what it was, but they couldn't see in their own institution. So once you held a mirror, it was showing, but the mirror contained all the data and it highlighted all their problems. So who will read this report? It's very important. So if you're writing a research report primarily for academics, you have to structure it accordingly. But when I want to stress again, don't misunderstand it. You can't doctor the research for the audience, right? How do you present is the question. The data is inviolable. Okay? How do you present it is what's important. So when we came out, and I'll come to that, when we came out with something called the Access to Justice report last year, our audience, in our mind, our audience was very clear. It was general public through the media. So it had to be very simply presented. So I couldn't use complex words and complex legal terminology. So we went with a lot of pictures, a lot of diagrams, a lot of pie charts. Right? Then we came out with something called State of the Judiciary report. It had a combination of various things. So how do you structure the report is very important.
Yeah, Hari, can you just explain the parameters, indicators, or the variables for conducting this empirical research?
I'll come to that. I think so. Instead of answering in theory, I'll just show you what we did. and you can.
Because the rule of law is very vague actually. You can include each and everything under the ambit of rule of law.
I won't get into that question because I've written a PhD thesis on the rule of law, so it's very difficult for me to stop. But I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. No, I understand. I'll tell you why we called it. Our project is called the Rule of Law Project, but our research is not focused on all the aspects of the rule of law. Why did we call it the Rule of Law Project? And actually, Professor Mother Menon told me, why are you calling it the Rule of Law Project? Just call it Judicial Delays Project. That's what you're doing. But our goal was something different, because we believe that the judicial delays, just to explain the thinking, the judicial delays has basically, in my view, rendered our judicial system obsolete, right? In one sense, but more than that, it's made ineffective. Right? Justice Leela said, what is the point of getting a divorce decree when you're too old to remarry? Right? That's what's happened. Right? So if the judiciary is not enforcing rights and obligations in a timely fashion, not in a speedy fashion, right? In a timely fashion, then the rule of law is effective. That's the thinking. So our data doesn't look at all the aspects of the rule of law.
Maybe so your project deals with access to justice. Maybe economical or speedy access to justice.
I'll come to that. I'll show you what we are doing.
Okay.
3-4 projects, and you can draw your own conclusions. But more or less similar. So on structuring of the report, for whom is important. So I will now look at 2 or 3 things that we have done. Okay, and explain how we looked at each of those. I won't call it projects because they're still continuing. So our work, 2 or 3 different aspects of our work, and I'll explain how they fit in within the framework of these 4 questions. But this is how we look at it. For us, empirical legal research means this. Is it research for academia? No, it is not. Our research is only for understanding the judicial system from a citizen's perspective. That was our goal, and that's the other thing I want to add, because judicial delay is a topic that's been written in many law commission reports, right? And in many commissions appointed and headed by former chief justices, etc., etc., etc. But what I found striking was that all these reports talk about it from an institutional perspective. The problems of judges, right? The problems of lawyers. They don't talk about the problems of the litigant or the citizen. So for Daksh, from day one, we have been very clear that at the center of our work, it should be the focus of the citizen. And I'll give you an example as to why there's a difference. Let's go back to, what is our core area, which is, judicial delays. So, if there are 50 cases listed on a given day in any court, the judge actually manages to hear about 45 of them on that day and passes reasonable order. Let's assume it doesn't happen. It never happens in any court in India, but let's assume for the sake of argument. He's had a fantastic day. 45 out of 50 good orders. The judge is a fantastic day. From the system's perspective, it was a great result. What about the guys who are involved in the 5 cases that were not heard? Right? For them, the system is failed. So that is why it's important to look at the judicial system from the citizen's perspective. And that's what we want to do. It's not as if we have not tried to understand the judge's perspective. It's not as if we have not tried to understand from a systemic perspective or an institutional perspective. So there are things like judicial independence and what the judiciary guarantees. It guarantees fairness, it guarantees natural justice, and all of that. So we need to keep all of that in mind. But it's important to look at the system, in our view, from the citizen's perspective. So, And that is something that has been, the core of what we do. Let's move on. So what we have done, the first thing we have done, and this constitutes the core of what we do. We said we have to build a database of cases that are pending in the courts to understand one thing, and why. So it comes back to why, right? We wanted to understand the life cycle of the case, right? How long does it take for cases to go through the system? Are particular kinds of cases getting more delayed than others? Are there some judges who cause more delay than others? Are some states doing better than others? Are some high courts doing better than others? Okay, so, and to understand, what this 3 crore case was, because anecdotally, many judges say, 3 crore case, it's not a countrywide problem. If you take the top 5 states, essentially the top 5 high courts, Allahabad, Mumbai, Calcutta, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and one more, then that is about 70-80% of the problem. Is that really true? This is a question. So, what we said was, let's go and collect the data. So going back to my question, my earlier question that I asked, what is the most reliable piece of information that the judiciary puts out? And we said, let's look at the cause list, because that is the only piece of information that is verified by somebody outside the judicial system, if you can call lawyers outside the judicial system. But they're not part of the judicial administrative system, they're outside because they're representing clients. So, and thankfully for us, all the high courts have websites now, and the cause lists are all online. Most of the lower courts are also online, the cause lists are online. Some states are better than that, and our friend pointed out earlier. Like some of the southern states are better because of connectivity issues and all of that. They upload cause lists every day. Like Tamil Nadu is very good. Karnataka is okay. Maharashtra is actually bad, we found out in certain districts. Delhi is excellent when it comes to cause lists and data. So we said there are some problems with some courts, but by and large, the ecourts.gov.in is a good reporting mechanism. Okay, it doesn't give 100% of the data that you want. It gives basic information. What does it give? A cause list gives certain data. It gives name of the parties, the case number, names of the advocates, when was it listed previously, what was the last date of hearing, and after the date of the hearing, what is the next date of hearing. They're also supposed to upload the order sheet for that day, but that doesn't happen generally across the day. And high courts also have case history status. So you can potentially, for some high courts and for some district courts, you can go and find out the entire history. So if there's a case that is pending since 1953, you can actually go and pull out all the hearings for that 1953 case. At least the dates, not what happened, you can't still find. That's still only available in the physical copy. But online you can pull out. So what can you do with that? You can build a life cycle of the case, right? And you can see the number of hearings that is required to bring any case to a particular stage. Then you can also link it to if there are 100 cases in that judge's court, how many of them get adjourned. You can do various analysis of the data. So why was that? If you go back to my 4 points, why is important before you do it. So the building of the database was just a why. There was no such database. So we said, okay, why not build it? Right? And data was key. Okay, so data was available. And to be honest, this database could not have been built 15 years ago, because the data was not available online. Now, thanks to the eCodes project, thanks to all the high codes getting coming online, it's possible to build this data. Understanding the functional process was key. Why? We wanted to understand what happens on any given day. And we haven't been fully successful with our data because as I mentioned, all orders of each hearing are not online. So unless you actually go to see the order sheet in each case, you won't be able to know that. So there's a gap in data to that extent, but at least you know that it went to the next day, and it was not. At least two things you'll know: whether it was disposed of that day, or it's gone to another day. So those that kind of information is there. We didn't have any particular objective here. Okay, our only objective was creating a database that can be used by other researchers and by people in the system to understand how their own system is functioning, whether the judiciary, whether the Department of Justice, whether NITI Aayog, whether media, we didn't care who it was, because this was just data, hard data, and anybody can use it for whatever purpose. So if somebody is doing an analysis of how long do writ petitions take in the Odisha High Court, they can look at it, and say, use data. But to go deeper into types of writ petitions and all that, you'll have to do additional research and additional data gathering, but the basic data is here. So the target audience was very broad. As I mentioned, it could be judges, it could be administrators, it could be academics, it could be lawyers, it could be economists, anybody. So we didn't want to put the data in any straitjacketed form or impose our view of how the data should look. But what we also wanted to do was give an indication to people who come and use the system as to what is possible, right? So we have presented the data in varied form. So let's go and look at the database. Hope it works. Probably need to get out of this slideshow, right? So we go to this. Okay, it's worked. So, anyway, so the database is free. You just have to register once, and then you can use it as you want. I'm going to use my login. Let's hope the system is, the speed is fast enough here, it will open up soon. Meanwhile, let's go back to the presentation while this is opening up. So the presentation of the data was, it's very, and I'll explain the database a little bit more to give you an indication of what is in data. We also came out with something called the State of the Indian Judiciary Report in August 2016. That was a combination of hardcore database articles written by us, the Dutch team, and a series of articles written by various other people. We asked people to root their articles in data, but not many were able to do it. So there are a lot of sort of personalized experiences. So we wanted to understand a judge's day, right? We only complain about the judge. So what does it mean for a judge to sit there and listen to 80 cases? And again, how many of you have practiced as lawyers? Just to, okay, a couple of things. See, as lawyers, we go to court, right? If say there are 80 matters, we are number 20, right? we're just geared up to argue. So number 19 is over, that we've already maneuvered ourselves to the front of the court. Then we go, we just, I say something, the counterparty says something, the judge says something, we're out. We forget to the judge, it's not over. Another set of jokers are standing before him, and he's continuing. So what does it mean for a judge? And we never understand this. And one of my friends who understands psychology and has done some study on psychology says that the optimal number of decisions apparently that a human being can make in a given day is about 8 or 9 in total. Optimal number. And our judges on a daily basis are doing things like 80, 90. And even a decision as to whether the case should be postponed or adjourned is a decision. Right? So we wanted to understand what it feels to be a judge. We wanted to understand what it is like to be a court clerk. We wanted to understand what it is like to be a lawyer whose case is number 79 and who's just sitting there, unproductive. So we have articles written by various people. That's not database, but just explaining how it works. Does it work? Fantastic. Okay. So this is how the database looks like. All of it is not open yet. So what we did was, so you can't see all the data. So what we have, the total number of cases as of today, and I will go to this overall dashboard as we call. So let me. It's still opening, but so from the Supreme Court we have about 19,184 cases. Although the newspaper reports indicate there are only 65,000 cases in the Supreme Court. But it's not, some of it are cases that may have been disposed of. So that's why the number is a bit more. And we have details of about 2,13,477 hearings. And this is the first level of conclusion you can make. For this many cases, there are that many hearings. I remember reading a report in a UK magazine about how barristers were complaining that there were 4 hearings in a period of 12 months in a matter. They said 4 hearings means it's becoming too expensive. Why are there 4 hearings? Right? It should be fixed. You can't just keep calling parties in court. And this is the Supreme Court. It's not lower courts. Right? So that's one thing. That's a question we need to ask as lawyers and legal academia. We should ask the judges. Why should there are some cases where there are 250 hearings, 300 hearings. We are the only country in the world that this happens. Right? So
2016
which one?
This
No, this is the database. So this is, ever since we started collecting data, all the data is here. Right? The 2016 report I'll come to. But 2016 report is not, so the report, it came out in 2016, that's why it was called 2016.
This is starting from which year to?
So we started in 2015. So this is the number of cases that are currently before the court. Currently before the court. Some of them may have been disposed of. Okay, so it's about 65,000 is what the Supreme Court claims. It could be because many of them are numbered separately, but called together. So then if you take the numbers, it's about 90,000. But many cases get called together in the Supreme Court because the issue is the same, so they club together. So it may not show as 10 cases when they're all clubbed together. Okay, but there are actually 10 cases in the system.
Why?
Sorry.
You've taken into consideration the judgments delivered by your cases pending before High Court and Supreme Court, right?
No, that is the Supreme Court. I'll just show you what data we have, right? So, yeah.
I wanted to ask that why when penalty is showing so less, penalty is just 1,100 something.
No, that's the number of days. That's the average number of days in the Supreme Court. If you file a case today,
Okay.
the likelihood of that getting decided, average. It's just simple average, not case type average, not not only SLPs. So anything that gets filed to the Supreme Court, so the SLPs sometimes get dismissed on day 1. So those are gone. But including those also, the average pendency number of days is 1184. That's days, right? So the reason I'm showing is, see, we didn't have any, so we've just put some average numbers there. So because there was no specific objective, the idea was to put the database out there and let other people, write reports on their own. We have written some report based on this, which is included in our State of the Judiciary report, which I'll show you, and that comes to how we present the report. In terms of data gathering, this is all we have done, right?
And it is being updated every day.
Yeah, it shows as of May 23rd, 10:55. Okay, so the data, no new data is getting added every month, every minute, because data courts upload their data only at the end of the day. It doesn't happen instantaneously. So we pull the data almost on a daily basis, so that we have software written that functions overnight basically and pulls the data, and the data gets upgraded on a weekly basis in our database. So you'll notice changes only once in a week unless we have added some new codes, right? So I'm just telling you how wide the database is so that you can then draw your high courts. We have almost all the benches of the high court, so we have 29 that include the benches. The average pendency is 1358. This is across all the high courts, across all case types, across these. Right? This is just, so how did we come up with this number? We just took the number of cases where it was filed, and if it's still pending, just divided it and come to the number of days. Right? In the high courts, we have about 42 lakh cases from all the high courts, and details of about 3 crore 16 lakh hearings in the high courts. These are lower courts we have covered. So as I mentioned, there are about 17,500 lower courts. We have covered about 3,284 lower courts. Data from 3,284 lower courts spread across the country. We wanted a sample for across the country. So we are not going to cover 17,500. It's too expensive. We have, because government is maintaining it. We don't need to maintain it. So 3,200 courts. The average pendency is 2,000, and this is across civil, criminal, all types of cases. We have about details of about 52 lakh cases from the lower courts, and that translates into about 5 crores. So it's a massive database. That's why it's very slow when we pull it out. We're trying to see how it can be improved. Yes, you had a question.
Sir, there are.
Please don't call me sir. Harish is fine.
Okay. Alright. 29 high court benches.
29 high courts we have covered. Yeah. So some high courts have, there are only 24 high courts, some of them have benches.
So because Guwahati works for...
So we pretty much covered all the benches.
Okay.
So this is just to give, so then we said, so this gives some, state-wise narrative, what we have done, then recently added courts, right? So this is like the overall picture. It's not very fast here, this one. So I'll just show you some basic data that you can go and research and look at it. So like just to look at the High Court's dashboard. So this shows the pendency by court in terms of number of days. Now, Meghalaya, for example, shows it's very skewed because we may have taken only 2 cases from Meghalaya because that was the last thing we took, so it looks very blank. So it varies. So more as you keep adding data from each court, the changes. So Meghalaya is not as bad as it seems. And this is the point I made earlier. Data, if you don't understand it, is very misleading. And the example I gave you. So we put out a report initially as to how in Calcutta High Court, the days between number of hearings is very small. And promptly, actually one of my friends from my law school days, he noticed it and he called the Times of India reporter. And then Calcutta edition of the Times of India published a report as to how Calcutta High Court is one of the most efficient in the country. Nothing could be farther from the truth, right? Because the days between 2 hearings is not an indicator of efficiency. It's actually the other way around. If you are calling some cases regularly, that means you are not able to decide the damn case, right? So Delhi High Court is actually the converse. Delhi and Karnataka, for example. Delhi High Court, the average number of days between two hearings in the same case is about 60. but their pendency is one of the lowest. Lowest is relative, right? It's about 900 days still. It's not that bad. Karnataka also, average number of days between two hearings is about 60 or 70. In Calcutta, it's I think 14 or 20. But they published it as a great achievement. And then they had an interview with a senior advocate, and he also, lawyers, we are happy to give statements without understanding what the issue is. So there were a couple of interviews, all that happened. So this comes back to the point I was telling. So putting out data is one thing. Drawing conclusions of the data, particularly if you're using somebody else's data, please be careful. And even another research institution used our data recently and they made the same mistake. They said, oh, this is a conclusion. And I called them and said, listen, at least you should have asked us because you know us very well. So please understand data before you come to certain conclusions. Okay, but I don't want to, our objectives of this database, and I want to contrast this with the other couple of things that I'm going to show. We were not making any conclusions, right? Even so, that's why it's like we are just saying number of days pendency. We are not drawing any conclusions. We are just presenting the data. We have divided and put up some indicators of what you can do. But if you don't want number of days, you want something else, you can do that. It's possible to ask. You can create your own reports and all of that. It's a bit complicated because data is humongous, but it's not something that is rocket science, so you can do.
What is the nature of research in this particular case and methodology adopted by you for the collection of this data?
So the methodology is this, right? The methodology is, the first conclusion was we have to rely only on the cause list. Okay? So what we did is we pulled, so every day, so the first 6 months, we started pulling, we developed a software that pulls the cause list every day. And cause lists are in PDF form, so then we had to convert it back, all of them. Then you can go on, most courts also have something called case status. So you can go on, using the case number, you can go and pull the historical data.
How to rule out that duplication?
So duplication, then you have to write a software for that to take out duplication. Now, this is where you need software. It's humanly impossible to do this. If you were to do it on a physical basis, I mean, we would be doing it for 160 years. Forget about how long it take to decide. For us to do research, it will take another time. That's why to do research on this entire database is almost impossible. That's why when Professor Bajpai said there are people from across the country here. So, if you are looking at particular areas, whether case types or geographical locations, you can do it. Okay? Or statute-wise, you can do it. Again, statute, there is a problem because not all courts give details of which statute is concerned. Right? Gujarat, for example, Gujarat High Court has very good data. It says which section number of each statute. Many other high courts don't do it. So there are challenges, but it's an indication. See, if all of you start doing research and ask questions, then they'll also put data. Right? Because I think until now, judiciary is not threatened by the academia. Somebody is writing some research report, nobody will read it anyway, there's no information. Whereas if Daksh goes and asks, they say, no, be careful, don't give it to these fellows, they'll put some report in the newspaper. So, what I'm saying is, you can do what you want. If you're interested only in, juvenile justice, for example, or human rights cases, it's a challenge to zero in on the data, but it's possible. I'm just showing the possibilities. But I'm also showing you the validity of this data and the limitations of this data. That was the point in this seminar. See, we can go on and on about this database, and I won't stop because I'm passionate about this. But for the purpose of this seminar, the message is data has a lot of promise, but be aware of its limitations. Okay, particularly as lawyers. Right? Because we have to deal, and a non-lawyer told me this, aren't lawyers and judges supposed to deal with facts? And I said, yes. And he said, but I never see any lawyer and judge doing that. They are happy to come to conclusions without seeing data. And it's true. We just jump to conclusions. Right? Don't quote me out of this room. Our entire appointment system is based on gossip. Right? Not on facts. Some facts, but mostly on gossip. So we thrive on this, right? Oh, so and so said, so and so happened. So until now, all our reports, Law Commission reports included, on judicial reform, the judicial delay, have been based on anecdotal experiences of individual judges, not on data. The other thing, for example, right, and I was discussing with Professor Bajpai before we came in. One thing that has always been discussed, right, and do we have enough number of judges? Our judge to population ratio is one of the worst in the world. But our case to population ratio is also one of the worst in the world. Right? To give you a simple example, right? In the US, in their state courts, 100 million new cases get filed every year. And there are 40,000 state judges. In our country, 7 million new cases get filed across the country in the lower courts. We have 17,500 judges. Right? We have enough number of judges. We are having a problem because we have this huge backlog. Right? And even according to if you go to something called the NJDG, which is a database that NIC has, an analytics tool that NIC has created using the e-court data, they show that every year more number of cases are being disposed of in the lower courts than the number of cases coming in. So the problem is a backlog. Instead of trying to address that, we're saying we need 70,000 judges, we need 80,000 judges, all sorts of things. So you can, question some of this. Maybe they're right. Maybe we need more judges. But on what basis do we say that? Right? India has one of the amongst democracies. I think it has the lowest, case. In terms of number of people filing cases, we have the lowest ratio in the world. So our overcrowded courts is not a result of more number of cases being filed. It's a question of inefficiency, right? And going back to the same example, we did something called, I need to keep a watch on time, we did something called a time and motion study. We wanted to understand what happens in court, from morning to evening in court, right, from 11 o'clock to 5. So we sent 2 young law interns, we got law students who came as interns. We sent them, we gave them a stopwatch. All they did was, okay, case number 1 of 10. Start the stopwatch. It took 3 minutes, write down 3 minutes. That's what they did throughout the day. About 45 to 55% of court time, of actual court time, is spent on calling cases and giving them new dates. That's all. And another organization had done a similar study in Delhi at the same time, and a similar kind of result. Right? So that is also it was an empirical study, right? It was actually a very difficult empirical study, to go and say it, and apparently the peon comes and says, "Who are you? Why are you measuring time? Have you sought permission of the Chief Justice?" Simple thing, right? So all these problems arise, but. So, just to give you a flavor, I need to move on, because otherwise we won't have time for discussion. It's already 11:15. So what I want to show you is, so if you scroll down, you will see various things. So we have tried to, this is our understanding of what people may be interested in, right? So no judgment, it's just what average days to disposal, average hearing by case type. So we have created civil case, civil appeals, civil petitions, civil report. In some high court, there is original jurisdiction, and what is the number of days it takes to decide those kind of cases is average. So you can go on, you may be interested in other things, you may be interested only for certain kinds, all of that. So you can do this. The average days between hearings I was talking about. See, this is available. You can go and log in and register and look at it. So it's freely available, so there's no problem with this. I want to show you just for the subordinate courts one, and then I'll show you some dashboards. Right? So this shows, and this is a very, very depressing state of report. In some courts in the country, 1 or 2 courts in the country, a case doesn't get called for more than a year and a half or 2 years. Right? So 800 days sometimes, so 700 days. It's quite a sad state of affairs. But just to show you the geographical spread of all the courts that we have covered, just to give a flavor of, so somebody shouldn't say, oh, you're only looking at Karnataka and not the others. Then we also try to see in terms of population to case ratio where it is the most. So we can do some. So what we did was we took the census data and we divided it by the cases.
Just one thing, when you're looking at population to case ratio, are you looking at population which is the adult population, or looking at total population? How are you?
Total population. So there's an error bit, you're right. It's only total population. But the case can be filed by anybody, right? So theoretically there's no error in it, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't talk about adult. It's overall population and then division.
So, but the census data is quite old when you compare it with the recent cases.
Where else do we go? Right. So those are the qualifications you can put when you're. But census data is pretty good. 2011 census data is what we used. No, 2001. I forget. But so latest census data, and we tried to multiply it. So we imported the data. So what we did was because to showcase what the data can do, we have created various reports. So you just go to all reports. It will open up shortly. So look at, so different people are creating. So somebody wanted to see 313 IPC cases. Somebody wanted to look at 376 rape cases. All sorts of sections. Do